All right, welcome everyone. I'm Dylan, and I'm excited to welcome you here. Sorry I couldn't make the event live, but I am going to be participating as much as I can. Jeff and Patrick are going to take great care of you. But to kick things off, I want to ask you a question. Why are you here? Why now? What brought you here today? And what do you want to learn from today, from the things that we will teach you? Now, you may be here because you know us and have worked with us, and you like us. And thank you. Thank you. I see some familiar faces out there. Um, you might also be here because you've heard about some of the assets we're going to talk about and are curious about learning more. Or perhaps you want to improve your finances so you can spend more time with your family and loved ones, or buy that new thing you've been wanting, or maybe travel the world. Or maybe you're here because you feel a certain level of uncertainty as it pertains to your way of life and economic well-being. And if that's the case, if it's any of those above, you found yourself nodding your head yes, right, you're going to get a lot out of today because there's a lot going on. And I don't blame you if you feel any sort of anxiety or tension or hesitancy or uncertainty about the future and about the economy. Right, we are the economic preppers because a lot has happened over the past few years that has led to the current uncertain economic environment that we're all finding ourselves in. But don't worry, we are here today to help, right? To help you be prepared and not scared. So here's what you're going to discover in this quick presentation. Why you might be feeling a lot of volatility and uncertainty in the world. Why trust in the system is at an all-time low. You're going to discover the 6 key assets to prepare for economic uncertainty. And you're going to discover the most valuable resource and how you already possess it. Now, let's look at some of the events and themes that have happened to set the stage as to why the assets we will discuss today are so important. The first key thing is media gaslighting and loss of trust. Right here, we have the NPC meme, and then someone puts on a red cap and is like, what happens when 90% of the media is controlled and owned by 6 corporations? Right, that's an important question to ask. What does happen? Right? Just a quick chart to show you the media biases, left, right, and how things are dividing more and more. This is another chart to show you just which media organizations are trusted more by Democrats or Republicans. Again, it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican. The whole point is that trust is being lost. We're being more and more polarized. So it's very, very hard to get a unified perspective or point of view. You know, one news station says one thing, and then the other one discredits it. The other one says another thing, the other one discredits it. And so it's like, who do you listen to? Where do you go to believe? It becomes harder and harder and harder to find the truth. And that's the real problem. And it's being only amplified by all these media sources and the places that we're plugged into, right? We even have it with the economy, right? We're supposed to be able to trust the Fed, right? Trust the Federal Reserve, of course, allegedly. We all know differently. And if you don't, you'll find out why. But this is back during the June of 2020. And Powell's like, hey, look, we're not even thinking about raising rates. Meanwhile, everyone in the crypto space, we're talking about how inflation's rising up and the massive money printing is going to create a bunch of issues, right? Federal Reserve continued even in 2021 to call inflation transitory. In April of 2021, call it transitory, and it decided to keep interest rates near zero. Now, this is in 2022, but we all know what happened at the end of 2021 is that the Fed announced they were going to start raising rates throughout 2022. And in September of 2022, Powell said that he vows to raise rates to fight inflation until the job is done. And we see right here how they kept it at zero and how we have this massive, massive increase in rates. And the most recent one was a 0.25 increase in rates here. But the whole point of this is that fake news and misinformation is being pushed out on all channels, right? They tell you one thing, then immediately they do something. They flip flop on one thing. They make a decision. They say they're going to do this, but then they go and do that, right? And it causes you to lose trust in the institutions. It'll cause you to lose faith in what they're telling you. On top of that, we've had a rise of authoritarian policies in free countries. Stuff like mandatory masking, mandatory vaccinations, and policies that lead to innocuous activities being grounds for arrest, right? And of course, people are out there protesting. People are out there pushing back. And what do we see when that happens? I mean, this is a peaceful protest, right? There's the trucker convoy in Canada This was an article that came out from that bank accounts were frozen of people doing a peaceful protest, standing up for things they believe in, which is something that this country's founded on, pushing back, speaking to power, right? Speaking your truth. I don't have to agree with it, but I can agree with your right to peacefully protest, even if you have a different opinion than mine. But if you have the wrong opinion, it seems that things will be cracked down on. Having your bank accounts frozen, having the financial system weaponized against you. Right? The bottom line here is that even free countries are starting to look more and more authoritarian. A final thing, which is I believe is significant, is that we're seeing a new standard of forcing new standards of health and beauty upon us. Right? Here's just one example of that industry. And saying that being obese is okay, right? Being obese is beautiful. Meanwhile, if you look at the numbers, we're getting fatter and fatter, right? And it's continuing to increase. And by 2030, luckily I live in Colorado, which will be the fittest state, but that's 30 to 39% just in Colorado that will be obese by 2030. But look everywhere else. Right? Why is this important? Because when you're obese, when you're addicted to processed foods, to factory farmed meats, or you're trying to get your health information from organizations that, again, aren't telling you the truth, right? You're more pliable. You're more easily able to be controlled. You're not going to push back as much. Look, if you can't even run a mile, how are you going to push back, right? How are you going to have the energy to go push back and fight against, to stand up for things that you believe in, right? On top of that, we have our elites pushing us to eat bugs. So again, new health and beauty standards being forced upon us, saying that it's in our best interest. Bottom line here is that if you can manipulate and control the food people eat and make them fat and dependent, then they become easier to control. So the question here is, why does it feel like governments are tightening the reins of control? And I think a big reason is the global financial system is starting to show signs of stress, right? With massive money printing in the past few years. Over 80% of all US dollars in existence were printed in the last 22 months, from 4 trillion in January of 2020 to 20 trillion in October of 2021. Right? And of course, it's continued to go up. Right? Here's just a chart of that increase in the monetary supply. You see that rapid increase on the far right there. We had inflation hit 40-year highs. Okay. And what kind of impact does this have when the United States is printing all this money, right? And excessively spending all this money and is operating with a huge deficit? It disrupts other countries around the world. Right, here's an example. Argentina is a great example of what happens of modern day hyperinflation. So this is the Argentine peso in October, right? And then on the right is the Argentine peso in February. Just a few months difference, and it went from 149 to 190. When I was there 6-7 years ago, it was eight pesos to the dollar. So that means if you held wealth, and I'll talk more about this later about CBDCs and what is money, but that means if you held any sort of wealth in Argentine pesos, that it just evaporated before your eyes. Right. And that's happening around the world. And what does that lead to? Right. This is a photo from a protest, I believe, in Sri Lanka, where their economy just completely collapsed due to some of the policies. People weren't allowed to withdraw their money. They weren't allowed, and because they weren't able to access their money, they weren't able to get goods and services, real goods and services that they need. Right. So they erupted in protest. And more of these events are going to start happening around the world. You'll see smaller economies, weaker economies start failing, start going under, due to decisions made by the leading economies, by the United States. Right. One of my favorite quotes from Max Kaiser, he's a Bitcoin maxi. He's the Bitcoin maxi, is you can't taper a Ponzi. So as they start to pull back, right, they run into problems. Here's an example. This is the usdebtclock.org. You can see the debt in real time. But we're at 31 trillion, almost $32 trillion in debt. We're spending about 6 trillion per year, and we're running a deficit of about 1.4 trillion. If you just look at the interest rate on this debt, and you can see at the bottom, you can see the debt to GDP ratio. We're at over 120% debt to GDP. That's not a good territory. That's a warning territory. There's examples of countries that have done that in the past, and things didn't end too well for them. right? But even if you just look at the interest rate on this debt on $31 trillion, it's around 2%, right? Which is about 700 to $800 billion just in interest alone on the debt, right? And that can easily create a runaway effect if we don't find a way to start paying that down to where the debt's growing, the interest is growing, especially with raising rates. And you can get into this debt spiral, and that's no good for anyone. So either printing will continue, so we'll see more debasement of our currencies, right? More economies around the world fail and have to reset, or it will all collapse, right? In a spectacular but terrible debt spiral. And we don't want that. So, what are some signs that there are cracks in the global financial system that I said that things are falling apart? Well, geopolitical conflict, the Russia and Ukraine war, that's a easy sign. Whenever you get wars or these proxy wars, or these kind of geopolitical tensions, what that means is that people are fighting over resources, right? People are countries that have vested interests in maybe different vested interests are trying to solidify their claim on access to different resources, right? They may have seen the United States as being weak, or they may have seen, hey, times are going to get tough. We better lock things down and get access to resources that we can control now before we're incapable of that, so we can survive whatever type of winter is ahead of us. So that type of stuff can play out, right? We see that the energy costs and prices have skyrocketed. This was in Europe this past fall, and that's no good. We see just massive increases, and these are real things, right? Over the past decade or so, we've underinvested in a lot of the real infrastructure and energy infrastructure for tech infrastructure and things like that. But we need real energy, real goods, real services to survive. And so if you see these rising prices, that destabilizes economies. People aren't able to afford to keep their businesses open. They're not able to afford to warm their houses, to go to work, right? And of course, gas prices, costing an arb, leg, or both. That's, was over the summer, and it kind of tapered off some in the fall, conveniently, right? But now up here in the mountains, right, in the winter, gas is almost $5 a gallon again. I paid over $4.25, and it's just been up consistently, right? So these are all signs of the economy showing stress, and then you're going to get new things arising. Bitcoin. We're going to talk a lot about Bitcoin today. But this is an alternative system that is gained international recognition and attention. Right? We're going to see countries, smaller countries. This is El Salvador. This is Nayib Bukele, and they adopted Bitcoin as legal tender. We're going to see more and more of that. Countries that are failing under the current system, adopting alternative systems just to survive, just to keep their heads above water, to give them some sort of advantage. We're going to see more and more of that. Because the bottom line here is times are changing, and there's going to be power grabs to maintain wealth, freedom, and independence, and power in the new system that arises when things change, right? So now you know that fake news and misinformation is being pushed out on all channels, which equals a loss of trust and confidence. You know that even free countries are starting to look more and more authoritarian. You know that if you can manipulate and control the food people eat and the beauty standards that they aspire towards, right, and make them fat and dependent, they become easier to control, right? You know that either printing will continue or everything will collapse because we won't be able to pay even just the interest on that debt. And we know because of all these changes that there are going to be power grabs, that countries are going to tighten their reins of control to make sure they have access to the resources that they need to survive, right? And to maintain power if things start shifting around in the global power hierarchy. So what does this all mean? Right? Why are you here? I think it means that times are changing and people are getting fed up of fake news, fake food, fake money. People are waking up and want something real. And that is why being here today is so important. That is why getting introduced to this community is so important. That is why learning about these topics is so important. That is why these assets that we're going to talk about are so important. Right? And we're going to talk about more of these going forward. But here are just 6 of the core assets that you need to know about, that you need to understand, to include, to think about, to have access to in your economic prepper toolkit. All right, number one is land and real estate, preferably land and real estate that you can control, and perhaps is away from cities, away from areas where you're dependent on some sort of major infrastructure. If you can get land and real estate where you're self-sufficient, right, that is the holy grail of opportunity these days. Right? People are flocking out of the cities. Right? Everyone's saying get land and real estate, be self-sufficient, right? Because if things go to hell, like we saw in COVID, and resources dry up, right? You don't want to be locked down in a city. If you have land, right, you could have running water, you can have some livestock, you can have some chickens, right? You can be able to sustain yourself. So that's always important. Another one is gold. Gold is becoming more and more relevant after being seemingly irrelevant and the butt of many jokes, especially in the Bitcoin community over the past 10 years. The use case for gold is, waking up again, and people are paying more attention to gold. People are paying more attention to silver, right? People are paying attention to Bitcoin, right? This decentralized trust minimized, censorship resistant system that's outside the control of the governments, right? Bitcoin is becoming more and more prominent, and you'll see that. You'll see it be adopted probably in other countries a lot faster than here. But there are more people in other countries, right? There's more oppressed people. There's more people that don't have access to banking that can benefit from Bitcoin. And you'll see it continue to rise to prominence because of a lot of its features. And we'll talk, of course, more about that today. Crypto, slightly different than Bitcoin. It still has a role, I think, in the world and the society now, and something that you should learn about and pay attention to. And then the final asset, and this is the most important asset, and this is the one that you already possess just by being here, is community, right? Look around. If you see someone you don't know, introduce yourself, meet these people, right? Because you can't know and be able to accomplish everything. Being able to tap into a community of like-minded people, of trustworthy people, of people that are self-sufficient, that know about the topics we're talking about, is your superpower. Because if you need something, you now have a group that you can go to that are more than likely able to help you directly or can point you in the right direction. So foster that community, because when push comes to shove and times get tough, right, you can rely on yourself. But also, if you've done the work and built the community and build that trust, you can rely on that community as well. So that is the most valuable asset. And I implore you to go meet everyone, talk with everyone, and to start building together. So that's it for now. If you have any questions, please let me know. All right, all right. Now I'm excited to be up here. We have a lot to cover. I'm gonna compress this down. This topic can take a while, but I'm gonna compress it down into about 15 minutes to give you as much information as I can about CBDCs, what they are, and what to look out for, and how to how to push back against them. So, anyways, I want to start with a quote by Benjamin Franklin that says, "Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety." Now, why is that relevant for CBDCs? All right, and I'll get to that when I explain how you'll be convinced that CBDCs are actually a good thing and that you should embrace them. But by being here, that's something that you should be very, very suspicious of. So, anyways, this is for you, even if you already know about CBDCs, right? This isn't for you. This is for you if you already have some sort of form of distrust to the government. This is for you, even if you already know a little bit about Bitcoin and crypto. And this is for you, even if you already have things like land, gold, silver, real estate, right? If you think you all know everything about CBDCs, there's a chance that many people out there that don't know anything about them. And it's your job to help educate them on some of these things, to help prepare them, to help them understand what these are and how dangerous they can be. So my goals for today is I want to increase your knowledge on CBDCs, increase your awareness. I want you to show you the danger of CBDCs. And I want to give you a resource that you can use to help educate people important to you that might not know as much as you do about CBDCs. So that sounds good. Let's get into it. Here's what you're going to discover. We're going to start with touching briefly on what is money. I know Jeff talked about that earlier, but I want to reiterate that in the context of CBDCs. Right? We're going to talk about what is a CBDC and why they're coming. are likely to be coming, how they'll suck you into thinking CBDCs are a good thing. I'm going to show you some dystopian outcomes of CBDC and why they might be more likely than you think. And of course, I'm going to give you the tools and resources to educate your own community on the dangers of CBDCs. So let's dive into this. What is money? And this is a very big topic, and this could be a whole day in itself. But briefly, money doesn't physically exist, at least from my perspective, my understanding. It is, from my perspective, a socially agreed upon ledger that uses tokens to represent stores and transfers of value. So money is just a ledger, and the things that you think are money, gold, silver, dollar bills, whatever, right? Those are just tokens that have been assigned to represent stores of value within the ledger. And what are stores of value? Well, they're typically things that humans have decided are valuable, right? And that someone has brought to the community, the marketplace, the society, right? Through their own works, through their labor, through whatever it is, right? Those are things of value. And the ledger allows people to sell value, buy value, accumulate value, and get rid of value, right? And the tokens are used as an easy thing to allow that to happen, right? The primary characteristics of these monetary tokens became important, right? If you study the history of money, right? And the primary characteristics are durability, portability, divisibility, uniformity, limited supply, and acceptability, and require you, right? Having all those things, they also require you to trust their relationship with the underlying ledger, which makes not all tokens that meet those qualities the best form of those tokens, right? It's why we don't really barter with chickens and cows, and why they turned into seashells, and then those failed, and glass beads, and then those failed, giant stones, and then those failed, right? And then silver and gold, which have stood the test of time as pretty good forms of money because they have all those characteristics from before, but also they allow you to have a higher level of trust in their ability to represent the stores of value maintained in that social monetary ledger, the socially agreed upon ledger, right? Because you can't go counterfeit gold, right? Gold has a very fixed, they call it is a stock to flow ratio, a very high stock to flow ratio, meaning there's a lot of gold out there and there's very little gold that comes onto the market. Probably about 1% to 2% of the supply of gold, total supply of gold each year gets put on the market. And it's tough to increase that number in rapid amounts because of the decentralized and physical nature required to mine that gold. Okay. And it's why throughout history and throughout ages, right, gold and silver coins started being used as currency. And as long as the ruling parties didn't start debasing that currency, and typically what they would do is they would shave off the edges, so they would make it lighter. They'd still put their seal on there, but they'd make it lighter, or they'd blend it with other metals, things like that, so it contained less of the gold or silver, and they basically hold that gold and silver for themselves. That's basically the way they would debase it. So you'd have the same number of units, but less total amount of gold or silver. So it became less trustworthy. So of course, that increased risk, that less trust, decreased the value. And this is why I think and I believe that the greatest trick the government pulled on the people, right? Because moving from gold to silver, but was convincing people to sell real assets for corrupt monetary tokens, aka fiat. So when we went off the gold standard, when we got people to sell their land for dollar bills, that's a real asset. It used to be backed by gold, and you could at least trust gold. But now you had two layers of trust. You had to trust the fiat and trust that you could redeem the fiat for gold, right? Which was still, at least there's that linkage there. But as soon as we broke from that and just went full fiat, right? And people were still convinced to sell their land, to sell their time, to sell whatever value they produce for that, right? They're selling that for a corrupt monetary token that is basically radioactive and is decomposing in their hands as soon as they get it, right? Because as we know, fiat is programmed to the base. All fiats go to zero over time, right? And I like to consider this as value extraction built into that monetary token, that corrupt monetary token, of at least 2 to 7% each year. But we know that it's likely much, much higher. And that value extraction comes at the individual users' expenses, but not at the people that are closest to the money printer. The cancel-on effect, right? The people that are closest to the money printer get access to the new money first before that new supply gets distributed, before people who are holding that currency realize that that money has been debased. They are being outbid by people that are close to that money printer, right? This is literally theft built into money. And it works very well for the people in power, right? It works very well for those people that are close to that money printer. They don't want to change that system. And which is why I think that the clock is ticking, why that CBCs are on their way. And I hope that they do not come here to the United States, right? But here's a few reasons on why they're likely to, right? One thing is it's really hard to change the trajectory of a system, right? It's really hard to fix a system within a system. Sometimes you need a whole totally new refresh of a system, right? A reset. And CBDCs could represent that reset of the system, but they also seem like they're the next step for the system that we're in. And that's troublesome, but it's why we talk about things like Bitcoin, right? It's why we talk about things like gold, silver, land, and those type of assets. But anyways, a couple of reasons why I think they're on their way is number one, Uncle Sam needs the money. When I showed you that debt clock earlier, right? Just pay the interest expense on the debt alone, right? We need almost $1 trillion. And we're operating at a deficit anyways. So that interest expense is going to grow, especially if the interest rate is growing and the debt is growing. So Uncle Sam needs to find creative ways to slow the growth of the deficit, slow the growth of its debt. Otherwise, right, we'll go into a debt spiral. That's not good. That's not good for anyone. Two, Uncle Sam always wants his cut, right? There's a lot of transactions that can happen that Uncle Sam doesn't have insight into. Governments always want to cut. They always want to take their skim a little bit off the top, right? Especially when they need money, right? They're going to be paying more attention to transactions or areas that that they haven't had oversight or insight into before. On top of this, technology enables more control and insight and surveillance than ever. And then combine this with the fact that you have currencies failing around the world, but the dollar is still the most sought after fiat currency. And as a result of that, the United States wants to get the dollar in the hands of as many people as possible. Because when they do that, right, they have now more control over those people. Those people are dependent on the United States and their system. And the network of the dollar just grows stronger and stronger and stronger. Metcalfe's law. The value of a network is the square of the number of participants, something like that. So the more people they can get involved and hooked on the dollar, right, the better their network's going to do. And we saw how they use financial sanctions against countries and states that don't agree or don't play nicely by the rules set forth, and that they'll cut them off of payment systems. Well, if they have a digital dollar in more people's hands, that allows micro level surveillance and micro level punishments, which I'll show you here in a minute. They can more easily weaponize that and control people and countries, right, at the micro level. So imagine what type of influence that has. On top of this, right, why they might be coming here, or they're likely, is that other countries have implemented them, right? Look around the world. Look at these are all countries that have either implemented them, they're in development, they're launched. So this is happening, right? This is something that is happening. It is coming, and you got to pay attention, right? And some key findings from this just is that what it said of the G7 countries, the US and UK are the furthest behind on CBDC development, right? So we're the furthest behind, but we're actually the bigger players. So it's okay that we can be a little further behind. It makes sense the smaller players might be moving first, just so they can prime their systems for the inevitability if the United States or UK launches one, so that they are compatible with that system. I think that's what's going on with a lot of these, especially if you see China launching these. They're going to launch theirs. There might be an Eastern CBDC and then a Western CBDC system. I wouldn't be surprised. And I just think that is, and the final thing, if you look here, is the financials may face a significant interoperability problem in the near future if you have all these different CBDC models. Okay, so there is an opportunity for the one CBDC to rule them all, the one CBDC to bind them. And you could get that from a government like the United States, from the G7 countries, right? They agree upon, hey, this is the model we're going to use. Everyone's going to be able to tap into that. Now there'll be pros that they'll talk about, but there's also a lot of cons with that too, right? That's just that mass surveillance state. And I think because of all this, right, because of these things, that the US is either going to be forced to adopt a CBDC, right, and all the things that come along with that, and that's a scary road to think about, or adopt an alternative system. And luckily, even if they are forced to adopt a CBDC, there is an alternate system in something like Bitcoin, right? That I think has a ton of potential and a ton of growth here in the next few years, and is going to unlock a ton of freedoms for people all around the world. But let's get back to CBDCs. What they'll do, the main thing, this is what makes them so insidious, is they'll add a surveillance layer on top of all the built-in value extraction of fiat. Right? So not only will they be programmed to debase over time, but at who knows what, right? You don't get control over that. But they'll also be able to see every transaction. I like to think of them as like they're the evil, more powerful sibling to the dollar, because they're digital, which that increases distribution, as we see with all digital things. Basically, they're able to be distributed at a much wider range than their physical counterparts, right? Think about Google Maps, think about iPhone, Apple Music, all that kind of stuff, right? Digital pictures, even like face-to-face communication, you can now do with FaceTime on your phone. More so, like with people across the country, around the world. I'm doing a Zoom call here. Right? Digital increases scalability, and that'll be built into central bank digital currencies. They're inevitably going to be controlled by a private centralized blockchain or database, which will obviously equal a lack of transparency, right? You won't be able to see all the transactions, all the stores of value. You won't be able to see necessarily the production or know how new tokens come into existence, right? So there's going to be a lack of trust there. But hey, you might be forced to do it, right? Because it's like, when Uncle Sam says, hey, you got to adopt this system, right? They are backing the system with the full might of their military, right? That's basically what they're doing. So it's really hard to push back against that and to fight against that directly. You'll see KYC and AML. So know your customers, anti-money laundering. Registrations pop up on all these apps and applications, so they can tie your identity to the transactions. And of course, all transactions will be monitored, because CBDCs will only be able to be sent and received from approved wallets and services, right? And unfortunately, these characteristics give governments and central banks an intoxicating amount of power, right? And the likelihood of them abusing this power is almost 100%, right? They're going to abuse it. If not today, they'll abuse it tomorrow. It's inevitable that will happen. And here's some examples. So this guy, Darren Feinstein, go follow him on Twitter, but he had a really good thread about different extreme examples of CBDCs and what type of situation they can create, right? So you can see these here. Like, for example, purchase denied. Your energy footprint this month exceeded the maximum allowable under WEF guidelines. Your accounts will be reinstated in 14 days, right? Or purchase denied. Your social score this month fell below threshold for non-essential items. So all these little micro tweaks can be written into the code and programmability of this money, of this surveillance money. And so many of these things, these policies, are going to be pushed through for the greater good, right? To empower certain people, but at whose expense? That's always the question. Here are some other extreme examples that you can look at. All of these things, I know it seems dystopian, I know it seems extreme, but all of these things are conversations that are happening in the public sphere now, right? And even the political sphere, and that they can, with CBDCs, they can more easily allow the implementation of these things, these policies, right? Because you can directly send money or restrict money from individuals at will as you see fit, right? That's a really dangerous system to put in place. And like I said, it's not if it gets abused, it's when it'll get abused. It will be abused no matter what. And of course, if you think these things won't happen, right? Here's an example from China, right? Bank protests stopped by turning health codes red, so that the people couldn't use public transportation because they didn't want them to go protest at the bank. So they said they are all potentially exposed to some deadly virus, right? Even though it really was just creating friction to prevent pushback, to control the society. Here's another example of a digital yuan with expiry date. And this is from 2021, right? So you have to spend it. You have to put this into the economy. You have to buy things. Well, what things are you allowed to buy? It's a good question. But if they control all the transactions, there might be only approved items that you can buy. So that creates a real problem. Now, if you're like, okay, well, now I know this, right? I'll never use a CBDC. Well, I think it's going to be hard for a lot of us because I think they're going to find creative ways to promote CBDCs, right? Because the ultimate goal of this, when you create any new system, is you really want to make it easy to onboard. So we make it very easy for people to go into the system, but hard for them to leave. It's like a raccoon trap. Raccoon trap, what you do is you get a little jar and you put like some nails pointed down inward into the jar, and you put something shiny or some food in the jar, right? And the raccoon, when it reaches its hands in, right, it goes through, and so it doesn't get poked by the nails, but then it makes a fist, and when it grabs the thing, and then when it tries to pull its hand out, the nails poke it, so its hand gets stuck. So in order to get its hand out, it has to like let go and like very gingerly pull it out. And a lot of raccoons, they don't. They hold on to the thing and they have their hand stuck. They flail around, right? Raccoon trap. I forget where I read that or what book that was in, but that's what these systems do. That's what they want to do. They want to make it easy for things to go in, hard for things to go out. Banks do this, countries do that, cities do that for the most part, right? Easy for resources to flow in, hard for resources to flow out. Okay, here's an example, right, that they'll use. This is progressive, but the example is basically you opt in, have this tracker installed on your car, and you get discounts. Well, you can imagine how this can be applied to various areas of life, right? Different things. They're also going to do things like direct stimulus payments and things to help deserving people or oppressed people. That's going to be a thing, but they're going to fail. And why are they going to fail? Because the current system isn't adequate, because there's people that oppose this, and the people are making it hard. But if they had this new innovative system, right, if this new technology, this new CBD system, they can get this done for half the cost and half the time, right? So they're going to fail things in the current system to make the new system seem much more appealing, and that, oh, well, if we move to the new system, we'll have success there. So those are things that will happen that you'll see. So we'll keep an eye out for those. You're probably also going to see things like cash buyback programs, deposit cash, get extra CBDCs. So various incentives to kind of boost the amount of CBDCs that you get. So you start moving more of the value of your life to this CBDC system, so that once that happens, like, you're stuck there. Like, they're not going to have exit ramps for the CBDCs. There's going to be certain things they're allowed to buy or not buy. Again, here's some other perks of CBDCs that they will say that are benefits. And of course, they're going to use a lot of the language. You'll notice some of these are very similar to what people say the perks are of Bitcoin. They use a lot of that same language for CBDCs. Unfortunately, most people buy it hook, line, and sinker because they're plugged into the matrix. I'll just let you read that quote real quick here. Now, just to wrap things up, the bottom line is the government, media, and major corporations will use every trick in the book to onboard you into the new CBDC system. So now you know CBDCs are surveillance disguised as money. Once they're implemented, you'll have to trust the government not to abuse their power, trust the central banks, and we know they'll abuse their power. It's not a matter of if, it's when. We know the adoption of CBDCs is a path to authoritarian control and likely a loss of America's position as a global leader. You know the U.S. is slowly being forced to adopt CBDCs or an alternative system, hint, hint, Bitcoin. One pushes financial slavery and one pushes financial freedom. And you know they'll use all tricks in the book to get you to think CBDCs are good. And these will work on most people because most people are still plugged in and they need your help to unplug. So what to do, how to prepare? Well, the first thing is get educated. You're here, so you're getting educated. You're talking to people about this kind of stuff. Keep an eye out for news and updates pertaining to the topics that I discussed. Expect the media to make CBDCs sound great, right? I definitely expect FUD for competitors to come out leading up to big CBDCs events and launches. So expect that. And it's always good, and we're going to talk more about this, and not financial advice, to have assets in analog and decentralized things, Bitcoin, gold, silver, land, things that aren't digital, things that can't be taken, things that are real, things that you can protect yourself, right? Things that you can get access to. And of course, have connections who value non-CBDC items. And finally, one of the best things you can do is go out and build a community in your area and educate them on this topic. So, any questions?